Great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds. Albert Einstein. Widely considered to be the greatest thinker of the 20th century, Albert Einstein contributed more to the field of modern physics than any other scientist in history. From his humble beginnings in Ulm, Germany, to his last days in Princeton, New Jersey, his life was one of exploration and discovery. His ideas gave people a new understanding of time and space, mass and energy, gravity and light. A pacifist by nature, Einstein would lead the world into the atomic age with the invention of the most destructive weapon ever created by man, and then spend the rest of his life dedicated to speaking out for peace. We now present the extraordinary life of Albert Einstein. Any intelligent fool can make things bigger and more complex. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. Concern for man and his fate must always form the chief interest of all technical endeavors. Never forget this in the midst of your diagrams and equations. Albert Einstein was born on March 14, 1879, in this house in Ulm, Germany. His mother, Pauline, was a quiet woman with a passion for music and literature. His father, Hermann, owned a small electrical workshop at the time of Albert's birth. But his fun-loving nature often interfered with the business, causing problems between him and Pauline. Due to his lack of focus on work, Hermann would often take trips to the countryside, neglecting his business. This resulted in the shop failing. He decided to move his family to Munich in search of a better life. He reopened the shop, but this time with the partnership of his brother Jacob. Business was good, and soon young Albert had a baby sister. Her name was Maria, but the family called her Maja. She was born November 18, 1881 in Munich. When little Albert saw his sister for the first time, he thought she was a kind of toy and asked, "Yes, but where does it have its small wheels?" Maja and Albert got along very well. She was Albert's only friend during his childhood. She and Albert would become close and remain that way for the rest of their lives. Nothing in Einstein's early childhood suggests dormant genius. In fact, he was a very slow developer, late in learning to speak. Even by the age of 9, he still was not fluent. His parents feared that Albert was mentally challenged. Between 1884 and 1889, Albert attended Catholic school in Munich. Although he and his family were devout Jews, the Catholic school was closer to his home and less expensive than the nearest Jewish school. Einstein quickly developed a deep dislike of formal education. It was the strictness of the school that agitated him. He was an inquisitive young man and wondered why students were only allowed to answer questions and not ask them. Because of his dislike for school, his grades were very poor. The school's headmaster once told Hermann Einstein that Albert would become a failure because he couldn't apply himself. But he was very wrong. Albert's real education would begin at home. His uncle Jacob introduced him to algebra and geometry. Albert quickly developed an affinity for math and took great pleasure in solving these equations on his own. A few years prior, when Albert was only 5, he became very ill. While bedridden, Albert's father gave him a compass to play with. The child was highly interested in the fact that the iron needle of the compass always pointed north, no matter what direction he was facing. He thought it was perhaps caused by something in space, something invisible. This fascinated young Einstein. After hearing of his fascination with these scientific concepts, Max Talmay, a family friend, lent young Einstein books on mathematics and natural science. Upon reading these books, Albert was hooked. From that time on, he was constantly reading about science, geometry, and other areas of math. Even with his newfound knowledge, school was still not interesting, and it was actually worse than before. Talmay would often visit the Einsteins' home. With Talmay's guidance and mentorship, Albert taught himself calculus at a mere 13 years of age. He then followed up by studying philosophy. In 1889, he began to receive his high school education at the Luitpold Gymnasium in Munich. Again, he thought the teachers were far too strict and believed that the rules prevented students from thinking on their own, therefore impeding their education. In 1894, Hermann and Jacob Schaap had hit hard times, and the two families decided to pack it up and move to Milan, Italy. They decided, however, that Albert should remain in Munich to finish the school year at the gymnasium. At the age of 15, Albert was left alone in Munich, and his attitude in school was getting worse. He soon decided to leave school and join his family in Italy. But soon, Hermann Einstein's business began to collapse again, and he urged his son to look to the future and learn a trade in order to make a livelihood for himself. In hopes of Albert becoming an electrical engineer, Hermann sent Albert to school in Switzerland. But this career held no interest for Albert. He wanted to study physics. In Zurich, Switzerland, stood the famous Federal Institute of Technology, known to many as Polytech. It was here that at age 16, Albert took the entrance examination of the Department of Engineering. He failed to pass the exams miserably. The director of Polytechnique urged Einstein to seek a diploma at the progressive Swiss cantonal school in the town of Arol. It was here that Einstein would create a theory and pose the question of what a light wave would look like to someone keeping pace with it. This question would go unanswered for 10 years. But when the answer was finally discovered, the world would change forever. After receiving his diploma in 1896, he was finally admitted to the Zurich Polytechnic. As a student at the Polytechnic, he often failed to attend lectures, opting instead to work on his own by reading the works of great pioneers in science and philosophy. It was here where he met Mileva Merrick, a fellow student and his future wife. He also met Marcel Grossmann, a brilliant mathematician who took meticulous notes during the many lectures and gladly let Albert study them before final exams. It was Grossmann who emphasized the importance of a non-Euclidean geometry called elliptic geometry to Einstein, which was a necessary step in the development of Einstein's general theory of relativity. Albert graduated from the Polytechnic in 1900 at the age of 21. In 1901, he gave up his German citizenship and became a Swiss citizen. With no steady job, Einstein supported himself by giving private lessons as a tutor and as a substitute teacher. In 1902, Marcel Grossmann came to his aid again. Marcel helped Albert get a job in the Swiss Patent Office in Bernay, Switzerland. To Albert, his years in the patent office was time well spent. Working on other people's patent applications taught him to express his ideas more clearly in writing. It also gave him the opportunity to think about physics in his spare time. He married Mileva Merrick in 1903. Their first son was born a year later. His name was Hans. During the day, he worked in the patent office. At night, he worked on his beloved physics and many of his ideas floating around in his head. In 1905, he decided to put these concepts and ideas down on paper. Einstein wrote a number of articles for a German magazine for scientists. It was called Annalen der Physik, or the Physics Annals. After reading his articles, scientists would never think or work the same way again. One of the papers in particular dealt with the photoelectric effect, which concerns the emission of electrons from metal exposed to light. The photoelectric effect